letter from the Queen seems to have fallen into my waste paper bin. Would you pick it out?
Behind the grandeur of the British monarchy lies a truth few dare to confront, a carefully preserved illusion built not only on legacy, but on entitlement. While the world marvels at the pomp and pageantry, at the crowns, carriages, and ceremonials, a more complex narrative simmers beneath the surface. The royal family is often seen as the embodiment of duty, grace, and tradition. But that spotless exterior masks something far less polished. Arrogance, the kind that isn't loud, but deeply embedded in the very fabric of royal life. It's not always about grand gestures or scandalous headlines. It's often in the silence, the smirk, the refusal to bend. Power has a way of hardening hearts, and royalty. It can breed a quiet, dangerous kind of pride. The public is fed a well-rehearsed version of the royals' stoic queens, dutiful princes, and graceful duchesses. But behind the balcony waves and rehearsed smiles are people just as flawed, just as fallible. And for some, the privilege of birth has blurred the line between confidence and conceit. For generations, the monarchy has cultivated an aura of divine right, a belief that their presence alone demands reverence. And for many royal family members, this belief has festered into behavior that feels untouchable, even reckless. What we call tradition may simply be control. What we celebrate as grace may, in reality, be superiority. These aren't just isolated moments of misjudgment, they are patterns, repeated, defended, and often hidden behind protocol. History is filled with examples. Kings who refused to surrender power even when their nations crumbled. Queens who dismissed progress in favor of appearances. Princes who wielded their titles like weapons in the quiet wars of politics, image, and influence. Arrogance, in the royal context, is not always about loud declarations. It's about unyielding silence, about actions done with the certainty that consequence is for commoners. Even now, in a world where transparency is demanded, some royals still move like ghosts behind velvet ropes, immune to the rules they claim to protect. So how did we decide who belongs on this list of the monarchy's most arrogant figures? Not by scandal alone. This list isn't about tabloid drama or headline-chasing controversies. It's about patterns of entitlement, visible or hidden. It's about those who chose self-interest over service, silence over empathy, superiority over humility. We examined decades of behavior, public choices, private whispers, and the moments when royal personas slipped, revealing something colder beneath. This isn't just a ranking, it's a revelation, and you might be surprised, because arrogance doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes it wears pearls, sometimes it smiles politely, sometimes it doesn't speak at all. But the message is clear. I am above this, above you. That's what makes this list so important and so uncomfortable. It's not just about who these royals are. It's about what they represent. A system that has long rewarded entitlement with applause. A culture where accountability comes second to image. As we dive into the names on this list, you'll see familiar faces. Some you've admired, some you've questioned. But all of them, at one point or another, stood at the crossroads of humility and hubris and chose the latter. And the very first name might make you pause. Because her story isn't one of scandal or power, it's something far more subtle. Yet in that subtlety lies the essence of everything this list exposes. Let's begin. In a family where every gesture is measured and every appearance scrutinized, Princess Beatrice has often lived in the quiet shadows of grandeur. Born into royalty, yet far enough down the line of succession to remain a peripheral figure. She grew up in a world that rarely made space for her to shine. And yet, she never faded completely. There was always a flicker of something restless in her, a need to be seen, not just as another name in the family tree, but as someone distinct, someone unforgettable. For Beatrice, that battle for recognition wasn't fought with words or rebellion. It was fought in silence. Until one day, it wasn't. Until the world watched her walk into the most celebrated royal wedding of the decade, wearing a hat that would echo louder than any speech. May 2011. the wedding of Prince William and Kate. Middleton was nothing short of a global spectacle. Dignitaries, celebrities, and monarchs gathered beneath the stone arches of Westminster Abbey, the eyes of the world fixed on tradition, grace, and fairy tale love. And then came Beatrice, wearing a towering, swirling fascinator that defied the eyed very essence of subtlety. It perched on her head like a question mark. No one saw it coming. But the moment she stepped into the camera frame, the moment that hat caught the light, it stopped being an accessory. It became a declaration. It screamed across headlines and tabloids, and beneath all the laughter, mockery, and memes, a deeper truth stirred. That hat wasn't just bad fashion, it was a rupture, a break from the obedient roles minor royals are expected to play. In a room filled with refined elegance and careful restraint, Beatrice made herself impossible to ignore. Some said it was tone-deaf, a desperate cry for attention. Others saw defiance in it, a refusal to blend in, to sit quietly while others ascended. Because when you grow up constantly outshone, constantly overlooked, you learn to carve space where none is given. For Beatrice, that hat was more than a fashion choice, it was armor, and she wore it boldly, even if it cracked the image the palace worked so hard to uphold. The public response was swift and ruthless. Social media exploded. Fashion critics ridiculed. Memes spiraled into viral frenzy. The hat became the butt of jokes across continents. And while the monarchy tried to ignore it, the narrative had already taken flight. Beatrice, once the quiet cousin, was now the headline. For better or worse, she had arrived. But what the public dismissed as a blunder may have been something far more personal. A manifestation of years spent waiting for validation in a family where only a few voices matter. A moment of rebellion, not with scandal, but with style. It was a statement, whether intentional or not, and it exposed something raw, an emotional hunger to be noticed, even at the risk of ridicule. Beneath her polished smile and royal posture lies someone still fighting to be more than just a name. Beatrice has never been a scandal maker. She's not brash, not reckless. But in that one choice, one bold, defiant choice, she flipped the narrative. She turned the background into center stage, if only for a moment. And in doing so, she gave us a glimpse into the quiet turbulence behind palace walls. But while her rebellion was wrapped in ribbon and beige silk, others in the royal fold have wielded their arrogance with far less subtlety. She was the royal, who never wore the crown, yet controlled the very heartbeat of the monarchy. Behind the soft laughter, delicate pearls, and pastel gowns was a woman of remarkable calculation. A matriarch not just of blood, but of power. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was far more than a smiling relic of the past. She was tradition's fiercest guardian. And in her pursuit to preserve a monarchy built on hierarchy and mystique, she became both a savior and a shadow. The world saw grace, but beneath that surface pulsed a relentless belief. The crown was not to be questioned, and neither was she. Her influence stretched far beyond her ceremonial role. During the darkest hours of World War II, when bombs fell on London and fear gripped the streets, it was the Queen Mother who stood firm. She refused to leave Buckingham Palace, declaring that she would not abandon her people. That moment immortalized her as a symbol of endurance. But survival wasn't her only goal. She didn't just want the monarchy to withstand the war, she wanted it to re-emerge untouchable. So she built walls around it, not of stone, but of reverence, protocol, and superiority. And those walls would stand for decades, guarding not only the throne, but the image of perfection she believed it demanded. As the world changed, modernized, questioned, rebelled, she stood still, almost defiantly so. The era of informality, of transparency, of emotional honesty, it never reached her. She clung to an older, colder version of royalty, one where duty eclipsed empathy and ritual outranked progress. Even after the war, as her daughter Queen Elizabeth II stepped into power, The Queen Mother remained a powerful presence behind the scenes. She resisted the loosening of customs, scoffed at calls for reform, and dismissed anything that hinted at modernity as a threat to the sacred order she'd fought to protect. Her belief in the monarchy's divine right to rule wasn't just a personal conviction, it was a crusade. And in that crusade, she quietly dismissed new voices, new cultures, and even the changing needs of her own family. Her charm was legendary. Warm smiles, gracious gestures, and a disarming wit. But those who worked closely with her knew something. Else behind the niceties lay a woman who measured every word, every movement, and every interaction with the precision of a monarch in exile. She didn't need to rule openly. Her influence was woven into decisions, into unspoken expectations, into the very silence that surrounded the royals. She wasn't just upholding tradition, she was preserving power. And that power, dressed in velvet and pearls, demanded absolute control. The Queen Mother's legacy is a complicated one. She is praised for keeping the monarchy alive through war and scandal. But the very values she protected so fiercely, formality, hierarchy, stoicism, would also become its heaviest chains. Generations that followed were shaped by her code of conduct, inheriting not only a dynasty, but a doctrine. Her unwavering belief in royal supremacy echoed in how future royals were raised, how they loved, how they suffered. To her, royalty wasn't a role. It was a sanctity, and anything less than absolute deference was heresy. But in holding so tightly to the past, she failed to see the present slipping away. Critics argue that her resistance to change kept the monarchy frozen in time, unable to adapt, unable to connect. Her disdain for progress may have protected the image of royalty, but it also deepened the divide between the palace and the people. In preserving the illusion, she may have stifled the evolution. Yet, as the monarchy marched forward into the modern age, her fingerprints remained. In the formality of events, in the emotional restraint of her descendants, in the refusal to bend, even when the world demanded it. She never needed to shout. Her control was in the silence. And as we turn to the next royal on our list, we begin to see how that silence evolved into something colder, more calculated, and far less forgiving. He was once the dashing royal bachelor, the Queen's favored son, the naval hero who flew across the globe with a charm that was almost disarming. The press dubbed him Air Miles Andy, a nickname that captured both his jet-setting lifestyle and the quiet sense of entitlement that clung to him like a second skin. Prince Andrew basked in a world where doors opened before he even knocked, where accountability was a foreign word, and where power was just another inheritance. But beneath the tailored suits and royal smiles, there was something brewing, something darker, hidden in plain sight. And when it finally surfaced, it wasn't just a scandal. It was a collapse, a brutal public reckoning that exposed the rot behind royal immunity. For years, Andrew drifted through life with the confidence of someone who had never truly been told no. He rubbed shoulders with billionaires, foreign dignitaries, and celebrities. Among them was Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender with a past steeped in manipulation and exploitation. Their association wasn't a secret, but the depth of it was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Lavish parties, private jets, trips that blurred ethical lines. Andrew remained silent as whispers turned into outrage. He insisted it was all misunderstood. But the photos told another story. The infamous image of him with Virginia Giuffre, then a teenager, refused to disappear. And with it, so did the lies. In a desperate attempt to clear his name, Andrew agreed to what would become one of the most catastrophic interviews in royal history. The BBC's Newsnight special was supposed to be his defense. Instead, it became his downfall. Viewers watched in disbelief as he fumbled through excuses, claimed he couldn't sweat, and offered alibis that sounded almost comical in their absurdity. But it wasn't funny. It was horrifying. He showed no remorse, no empathy, not even a flicker of understanding about the gravity of the accusations. What was meant to be a royal rebuttal turned into a stunning display of detachment. It wasn't just arrogance, it was a complete collapse of moral awareness. And in that hour, Prince Andrew didn't just damage his image. he incinerated it. The consequences were swift, but still measured through the lens of royalty. Titles were stripped, patronages ended, public roles vanished. But the palace didn't denounce him, they distanced themselves, quietly, cautiously, as if hoping silence could smother the flames. But the public wasn't quiet. They were furious. Protests erupted, charities disassociated, outrage turned into action. And yet Andrew, insulated by palatial walls, remained largely untouched by the kind of justice any ordinary citizen would face. That's what made the backlash even more fierce. He wasn't just a disgraced royal. He was a symbol of privilege, untouched by consequence. The world didn't just turn on Prince Andrew, it demanded that the monarchy do the same. And while he retreated into the shadows, the stain remained. His fall from grace was more than a personal humiliation. It was a warning sign for a monarchy that had grown used to silence as protection. The scandal didn't just belong to him, it echoed through the institution, shaking the very myth of royal infallibility. And as Andrew's story faded from the headlines, another royal's silence began to feel eerily familiar. Because while some collapse loudly, others hide behind the stillness, cloaked in dignity, but just as dangerous. In a family defined by tradition and shadowed by scandal, Prince William has mastered the art of appearing untouchable. He stands firm, composed, rarely rattled, a man molded by monarchy and disciplined by silence. But that silence speaks volumes, not in words, but in posture, in absence, in the steady refusal to be drawn into the chaos that has consumed so many around him. To the world, he is the dutiful heir, the future king, a figure of responsibility wrapped in regal polish. But beneath that polished exterior lies something harder to define, something that doesn't shout, but hums with tension. Because William's silence isn't just restraint, it's strategy, and in its echo, many have begun to hear arrogance. From the very beginning, his image was curated with surgical precision. Unlike his more impulsive brother, William was cast in the mold of legacy, the one who would inherit not only the crown, but the burden of centuries. He didn't rebel. He didn't run. He played the part stoic, controlled, always measured. And yet, it was that very control that drew suspicion. Because while the press fawned over his family man persona and the storybook romance with Kate, critics began to notice the cracks, the coldness in his public reactions, the distance he maintained even when empathy was needed most. William didn't just follow the rules, he built walls with them, walls that kept the media at bay and the public guessing. His relationship with the press is as calculated as it is complex. He demands privacy, fiercely. And yet, when it suits the narrative, he steps into the spotlight smiling, posing, presenting the perfect royal image. But the moment the questions get too personal, the warmth disappears. He retreats, withdraws. The cameras are tolerated, never welcomed. And over time, this dynamic has created something more than boundaries, it's bred suspicion. Because, in a world that craves authenticity, William's silence often feels like evasion. His dignity mistaken for disdain. His composure, at times, mistaken for superiority. He doesn't rage. He doesn't explain. He simply endures, like stone polished, smooth by obligation. But the silence grew deafening when his brother, Prince Harry, broke ranks. When Harry exposed the rifts, the pain, the pressure, the world looked to William. They waited for compassion, for clarification, for anything. But William didn't flinch. He said little, offered less, and watched from his ivory tower as his brother tore the curtain away. Their feud became legend, two princes divided not just by fate, but by philosophy. And William, in his refusal to engage, only deepened the sense that he saw himself above the drama, above the pain, above the people who wanted more than a wave and a rehearsed smile. Expectations have followed him like shadows since the moment he could walk. The heir to Diana's legacy. The bridge between old royalty and a modern world. But William hasn't bridged anything, he's fortified the gap. While the world grows louder, more emotional, more transparent, he remains still. Regal, remote, and some say that's his strength. Others say it's his arrogance. A quiet kind, dressed in duty but hardened by pride. The kind that says, "You don't need to know me, just trust me." But trust, once blind, is now conditional. And William, for all his control, cannot hide forever. Because silence, when left unbroken for too long, starts to sound like indifference. And indifference in a future king can shake the very pillars of loyalty. As William clings to composure, another royal has wielded ambition, with unapologetic boldness, choosing not to remain silent, but to take exactly what he believes he's owed. She didn't tiptoe into the royal family she stormed in, confident, dazzling, unapologetically different. Meghan Markle wasn't born into this world of crowns and curtsies. She carved her own path, an actress, a humanitarian, a woman who knew how to hold the spotlight and command it. When she married Prince Harry, it was more than just a royal wedding. It was a cultural collision. A woman of mixed race, with a career, opinions, and a voice, was stepping into one of the most rigid institutions in the modern world. And while the cameras captured the fairy tale, the palace braced for the storm. Because Meghan didn't come to blend in. She came to break the mold. And for the monarchy, that was nothing short of a threat. From the beginning, she challenged the rulebook with every step. She chose her own clothes, spoke her own mind, and carried herself not as a subject, but as an equal. To some, it was refreshing. To others, it was heresy. Royal tradition thrives on control, on silent obedience, on knowing your place. But Meghan had spent a lifetime finding hers, and she wasn't about to surrender it. She pushed for modern causes, for mental health awareness, for compassion-driven outreach. She wanted to humanize the crown, to drag it kicking and screaming into the 21st century. But the palace didn't bend. It bristled. And what began as subtle resistance soon exploded into open war. The press circled like vultures. Headlines twisted her every word, dissected her every move. The scrutiny wasn't just intense, it was brutal. Far beyond the criticism leveled at previous royals, Meghan became the media's favorite target. Her ethnicity, her background, her independence, all painted as liabilities in the tabloids. Stories leaked. Rumors multiplied. And through it all, she remained composed. Until she didn't. Because silence, when weaponized, becomes suffocating. Meghan and Harry walked away, not from family, but from the walls that refused to let them breathe. And when they spoke, the world listened. But not everyone liked what they heard. The Oprah interview wasn't just confessional, it was explosive. Meghan laid bare the pain, the isolation, the moments that nearly broke her. She revealed racism, neglect, fear. But for all the sympathy it generated, it also ignited backlash. Critics accused her of betrayal, of attention-seeking, of twisting the truth to suit her narrative. Her poise was read as performance, her bravery as manipulation. The very voice she had fought so hard to protect was now turned against her. And in those accusations, a new label began to emerge: arrogance. That she hadn't just left the monarchy, she'd tried to burn it down. That she wasn't fighting for justice, but for control. But maybe the real offense wasn't arrogance at all. Maybe it was ambition. The kind that didn't shrink beneath tradition. Meghan didn't want to be silenced. And that, in a world that demands quiet compliance from royal women, became her greatest crime. To some, she's a trailblazer. To others, a disruptor. But to the institution she left behind, she's a scar that still hasn't healed. And as the dust settles, one truth remains. Her story didn't just shake the palace, it split public opinion down the middle. Meghan broke the mold. But the monarchy, it turns out, is far more comfortable with those who simply learn to live inside it, even if that comfort comes at the cost of silence. And the next royal on our list? He knew how to wait. But when his moment came, he demanded far more than comfort. He demanded a crown. He waited longer than any heir in British history, an entire lifetime lived beneath a crown he could never touch. For decades, Prince Charles stood at the edge of destiny, watching others rule while the throne remained just out of reach. Monarchs passed, prime ministers came and went, generations shifted, scandals burned, and still he waited. But Charles wasn't idle. His reign didn't begin the day his mother died. It began in the shadows, years before, with every move, every calculated step. He was never just a prince, he was a strategist, one who understood that power doesn't always come. With a coronation, it comes with patience. Ruthless, disciplined, enduring patience. And now that he wears the crown, the world is finally seeing what that patience has built and what it has cost. At the heart of Charles's journey is a love story that fractured the monarchy. His devotion to Camilla wasn't a passing affair. It was an open defiance of royal expectations. While the world mourned Diana, he chose Camilla. Quietly at first, then brazenly, then publicly, and eventually royally. What was once whispered between palace walls became law as he named her Queen Consort. To many, it was the ultimate betrayal. The woman who had haunted Diana's marriage now stood beside the king. But to Charles, it was vindication. Proof that, in the end, he could rewrite the rules. He didn't beg for public forgiveness. He waited until public outrage softened into memory. And when it did, he claimed what he believed was always his, both the woman and the throne. But that confidence hasn't gone unchallenged. Charles's public persona has long been tangled in contradictions. He speaks of climate change, yet lives in palaces. He champions modernization, yet clings to ancient rituals. Critics call him tone-deaf, aloof, overly concerned with image. His efforts to reform the monarchy, slimming it down, making it fit for purpose, have been met with resistance. Some see him as progressive, others see him as performative. Because behind the handshakes and charity work is a man who's been molded not by empathy, but by endurance. He's weathered scandal not by facing it, but by outlasting it. And now, as king, Charles faces the final act of his lifelong performance: legacy. What will he leave behind? A modern monarchy, or a fractured institution barely holding itself together? His critics fear that his reign, though long-awaited, may be brief, and that he'll spend more time defending the crown than defining it. His supporters insist he's already reshaping the role, dragging it into relevance, one slow reform at a time. But either way, one truth remains. This is a man who has spent every waking moment of his adult life preparing to rule. And sometimes, that level of preparation doesn't come from humility. It comes from obsession. Because for King Charles III, the throne was never simply inherited. It was pursued, protected, preserved. Every decision he made, every silence he maintained, every controversy he survived it all pointed in one direction: the crown. And now that it rests on his head, it doesn't glisten with glory. It weighs heavily. For in chasing power through patience, he has outlived his doubters, but not their doubts. And as we turn to the final royal on our list, we see a very different journey. One not marked by patience, but by fire, by rebellion, by a desperate attempt to escape, and yet still be heard. He was the prince the world adored, the mischievous redhead, with a cheeky grin, a soldier's grit, and a heart that seemed untouched by the rigid expectations of the crown. Prince Harry was never meant to be king, and perhaps that's why, for a while, he was the most relatable royal of them all. He danced at parties, laughed with the press, and served with honor on the front lines in Afghanistan. The spare who somehow became the star. But behind that charm and military camouflage was a man wrestling with shadows the public couldn't see, grief that never healed, a spotlight that never dimmed, and an institution that expected silence in exchange for survival. That boy who walked behind his mother's coffin grew into a man who could no longer walk behind anyone. And that's when everything changed. When Harry stepped back from royal duties in 2020, it wasn't just a departure, it was an earthquake. The statement was short, the implications enormous. He and Meghan weren't just stepping away from the palace, they were stepping out of line. Tradition had been broken. The obedient second son had become the rebel prince. And though they framed it as a quest for peace and protection, it ignited a firestorm. Some called it courageous. Others called it betrayal. But for Harry, it was liberation. From the press, from protocol, from the silent suffering that came with palace walls. Yet, with freedom came a new identity, one he would carefully construct, through cameras, confessions, and controversy. The Oprah interview cracked the surface. His memoir, Spare, shattered it. And the Netflix docuseries made sure the pieces couldn't be put back together again. Through each medium, Harry told his story, raw, emotional, and pointed. He accused, revealed, explained. But as he opened the gates to his trauma, critics accused him of building a stage, of turning pain into performance. His most intimate grievances became global headlines, dissected by tabloids and pundits alike. And with every word, the royal brand he once represented seemed to splinter further. Was he seeking truth, or just control? A man protecting his family, or a prince who couldn't let go of the throne he'd rejected? The reaction was a battlefield of extremes. Millions empathized, seeing him as a casualty of royal coldness and media cruelty. But others, just as passionately, saw arrogance cloaked in victimhood. They questioned his motives, his timing, his sincerity. Why, they asked, would someone who fled the spotlight work so hard to remain in it? The lines blurred between authenticity and ambition, between advocacy and attention. Harry insisted he wanted a quiet life, yet his voice grew louder, more relentless with each new project. He wasn't just stepping away from the royal family, he was rebranding himself as its most vocal survivor. And yet, in all this noise, something undeniable lingers. Harry's pain is real. His loss, profound. His frustration, justified. But the way he's chosen to process that pain publicly, commercially, relentlessly, has redefined him in the eyes of the world. No longer the Golden Prince. No longer the silent son. Now, a polarizing figure suspended between truth and theatrics, duty and defiance. He left the institution, but not its shadow. He fought for autonomy, but inherited a controversy he may never shake. And so, as the final name on this list, Prince Harry doesn't just represent a fall from grace. He represents the cost of breaking the mold, the price of speaking when silence is expected. And in that price, we find the most haunting truth of all the royal family's most powerful weapon has never been the crown. It's the perception of those who wear it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.